Right, welcome to week 3, year 11. Thanks for tuning in again. Hopefully these are quite useful in terms of completing the questions. And we've got something slightly different this week. It is a comparison question. So previous weeks you've looked at how useful is something, but this one is where you've got to compare two sources. And obviously that means you've got to look for some key things. Now, the biggest thing really when you're looking at why two sources are different is where they are from. Okay, so it's really important that you draw attention to where they're from. And you're explaining why they give different accounts. So obviously a big part of that is where they're from. Okay, and it's asking about the living conditions. So why do they give two different accounts of the living conditions in the 1880s? Use the sources and your own knowledge to explain the answer. So this gives you a huge remit really to use your knowledge to show off, and it also allows you to use quite a lot of detail from sources. Now remember what we said, I don't expect you to just recite the sources as is because you're wasting a lot of your time. Use key bits of the sources and get the general gist of the source. Okay, so back to the actual question, why do they give two different accounts of living conditions? Well, let's have a little look at the sources first. If you look at the sources themselves, you've got source C and source D, both really useful and both for very different reasons, but that's not the question. Okay, what it's saying is essentially why are they giving very different opinions. And if you look at source C, you can see that source C definitely gives quite a positive account on the public health in London and the public health acts that have been the public health reformations since the Public Health Act. So we've got 1848, which to be fair didn't really do a great deal because it wasn't compulsory. 1875, which definitely improved public health, and obviously key reformers in between have pushed on Snow's discovery, which has been absolutely essential in discovering that cholera was spread by water, in addition to a few other things. Please remember to use your revision books as well to build up your contextual knowledge of this, so don't just use the videos. But when we look in detail at the source, we can see a few things. Source C, and this being really important, is from the Times newspaper. Now that's really important. The Times newspaper is predominantly read by quite affluent, quite high-ranking members of society. It is a difficult newspaper to read for the poorer working classes, many of whom have got quite a limited grasp on literacy. So the Times is mainly for the richer people in society. It's also written in 1881, so it's not too long after the 1875 Public Health Reform Act, which some could say is still knocking about. Some people are still very energetic and very optimistic about how much of an effect this has had. Okay, whereas if we contrast this with source D, this is from Charles Booth. Now we know Charles Booth is a famous philanthropist who has gone around the worst parts of London, the East End of London, and surveyed just how poor people are. Okay. Now in his report he found that the 35% of people, and again this is where your revision guide and your contextual knowledge comes in, very handy, 35% of people are living in poverty. Not poor, not struggling to eat, are living in more or less absolute poverty. And you can see from his account that this is the case. So if you look in detail, you can see that water is drawn from a tank that's nearly always full of rubbish. Okay, there are nearly all the families who live here occupy only one room, some of which the families are quite large. There's no chairs to sit on for a 60-year-old man and his wife. The room is swarming with vermin. It doesn't give a very good account really of the East End of London. Okay, so we've got two very different people, or two very different sources, sorry should I say, the Times newspaper and Charles Booth's Lives, Labour of the People of London 1889. Okay, so that would explain in large part why the two sources are different, who's produced them, okay, to what end have they produced them. The Times newspaper as well is going to be read by people from all over the world, so bear in mind, although it's going to give an honest account, this particular thing that's happening, okay, the exhibition, the Great Exhibition, is exhibiting new sewerage, new drainage, new water supply, and it's basically showing off, if you can, all the positive things that are happening in terms of public health. Okay, it even says that the government is fully aware of the importance of these requirements. One unhealthy court or alley could endanger the health of a whole town. Okay, and we know that the government has previously been really slow to act. However, in the Times newspaper, it would not appear to say that. Alright? It's also worth bearing in mind that, in actual fact, the people who are writing and reading the Times newspaper probably don't have any exposure whatsoever to the East End of London. So, yeah, it could be potentially the case that they believe that there's been significant improvements in health, but we know, obviously, many towns and cities couldn't afford to implement the 1875 Reform Act, even though it was compulsory. So some areas like the East End of London were still very, very poor. Okay? So back to the question then. Having analysed sources, remember you're looking at why these two things differ. So firstly, let's have a little look at who's wrote them. Really, really important that. And this is where you'd have to comment as well. And you're also looking at potentially the areas in question. Okay, this is the worst area in London at this point in time, possibly in the country, the East End of London. Okay, conditions are not good. Whereas the gentlemen and the ladies who were reading the Times possibly wouldn't have been exposed to any of these conditions. Okay, that's really, really key in this. And remember, you've got to use your contextual knowledge, and you've got to use details from the source to make sure you answer this question. Alright, I hope this is of some use. Good luck.